Look at this Magic the Gathering elf. It looks like an elf you could find in a Dungeons and Dragons manual or even a Tolkien book, right? Now look at this elf. The Lorwing elves are a fascist, supremacist species, and they're obsessed with physical beauty. In the eyes of their society, if you're not gorgeous, you must be an inferior being, and thus they have the right to kill you or enslave you. And how about this elf? The elves from the Simic Combine are geneticists and bioengineers. They're not shy to modify their own bodies, combining them with other creatures to acquire new abilities, such as breathing underwater. Fine, how about this elf though? It doesn't even look like an elf. Some of the most powerful Golgari elves were long dead when the swarm raised them from their tombs to join their ranks. Now, in death, they serve as decomposition mages and underground shamans. All of those elves and many more come from the same world building, all part of Magic the Gathering's lore. Here's a powerful thing: elves are an oversaturated trope. Yet, these three groups I showed, they're recognizable, memorable. Just the brief descriptions already give you so much to imagine. And this is one of the triumphs of Magic the Gathering's world building. It's high fantasy that, despite using clichés like elves and goblins and magical academies, it still manages to feel unique. What can we learn from them? Welcome to the Worldbuilding Tower, a series of videos in which I first introduce you to a wonderful piece of world building that exists out there in the wild, and then I transform that into an exercise that any creative brain can try at home if you want to hone your world building skills. And at the very end, I present my own entry for this exercise, not as a guide or the correct answer, but just as one out of infinite examples that could come from this exercise. If you're a fantasy or sci-fi writer, or if you're a dungeon master crafting a world for your players, consider subscribing to this channel for more videos like that. Now, if you don't know Magic the Gathering, it is the game that defined what a collectible card game could be and should be. For us here, it is particularly important because Magic the Gathering's world building team is one of the most experienced teams on the planet. Perhaps the most experienced. They create multiple high fantasy worlds every year, and after decades of experimentation, they really learn how to nail them. Their methods are varied and well documented. I'll leave some links in the doobly-doo of this video. But today, here, I want to focus on the dumbest of them all, because I do think it will create an interesting exercise. You see, Magic is primarily a game, and whatever worlds they create, they need to supply the needs of this game, first and foremost. Sometimes the game has narrative needs, like when they created this Lovecraft-inspired scenario, or when they wanted to provoke a sense of exploration and adventure on the players. But some other times, the game's needs are more related to game design and marketing elements rather than story. So for example, the world building team might create this whole world based on dragons because the sales team knows that dragon creatures are beloved by the players and they sell very well. Some other time, the world building team will flesh out this whole underworld lore with the journeys that can bring people back to life just because the game design team knows that a set based on the graveyard, on the cards that you already used and discarded, is healthy for the tournament environment from time to time. And still, the world building team must create a living, breathing world where those ideas can exist and thrive. And they manage. Here's an example. There's a type of card in Magic called an artifact. And they're supposed to represent objects, generally magical objects, like talismans and swords and boats. Usually, artifacts fill a support role in the overall design, but once in a while, the design team likes to bring a world that's focused on that particular card type. And here's two very different and very interesting responses to that same prompt. What if the basis of our world building were magical objects? In 2003, their solution was Mirrodin, an artificial plane that in itself is some sort of magical object. Beings from other places were brought here and they mixed with their environment, meshing their bodies with the elements of the land. The antagonist here was an intelligent virus, incorporating itself into the living creatures and assimilating all it could. In 2016, the exact same prompt brought magic to a completely different place, a place called Kaladesh. A plane inspired by the Inventor's Fairs, an optimistic world of artificers and engineers where society revolves around innovation and craftsmanship. The antagonist here was a political manipulator trying to build a particularly nefarious machine. Both of those worlds, they didn't start off with a narrative idea like writers and dungeon masters are used to, but with a requirement from a design team. And still, they're memorable. They have personality. And they did so not by reinventing the wheel, but by grabbing this very cliché high fantasy element, the magical object, and expanding it and raising the level of importance that had in their world building. Those worlds don't contain magical objects like Harry Potter or The Witcher. They are about magical objects. And that's just 2 worlds, 2 examples out of so many worlds these people created. I think that's a wonderful ingredient for a world building exercise. So, let's try it out. We might not have a game design team or a marketing department to send us a closed restriction, but I still think we can cook something with the limitations here. So the first thing you choose, it's a high fantasy element. And we're trying to go cliché here. We want the really common ones, the swords, the fireballs, the unicorns. But it must be chosen carefully, because you're going to extrapolate that element and bring it to its maximum capacity. What make this world revolve around the element you chose? How does it work? What are the rules, the logics? Can you craft a world in which this element is ubiquitous? Once you find this overarching logic, this theme, you will illustrate your world with 3 tangible examples. Now that you found the macro, can you tell us a little bit more about the micro? This can be anything really, maybe a political or cultural aspect of the world, or something about the shape of the fauna and the flora, how trade or romance or architecture or intelligence work in this world. The important part is to show how this high fantasy element kind of touches everything in this world, even if indirectly. So try to find 3 examples that are very different in nature. And with that, we get to the last part of this video, which is my own take on this exercise, which is not better, not worse than anybody else's, just one out of infinite ideas that could come from this. Just an example. If you want to pause this video and not be influenced by my ideas before you make your own world building, that's absolutely cool. And I would encourage you to post your world building in the comment section here on YouTube, so other world builders can comment and add questions and be inspired by your creativity. You can also check other people's creations below, and here we go. The thing is, I've been playing Magic the Gathering for most of my life. I know this game very well, so yes, I want to go full high fantasy cliché, but I also want to go somewhere that they haven't explored much. So the element I'm gonna use here is the trope of the bard. The minstrel, the musician, the storyteller. From Jaskier to Cacophonix, bards are a staple in fantasy and I absolutely love them. This is a world with a high density of magic. Magic is not something precious or rare, it is everywhere, and sometimes it even happens by accident. And the way I'll expand my element is that in this plane, magic and music are the same thing. If you can whistle a song, if you can learn how to whistle particular songs that do particular spells, You're a wizard, Harry. Because here, playing the song and doing the magic are the same thing. So, from your whistle, a ray of ice or a confusion mist will be conjured. But it also works the other way around. So if a wizard from another plane comes to visit this place and tries to cast a spell, they'll be surprised to see that their magic is also being translated into notes and harmonies and rhythm, not only ice rays and confusion mists. As music and magic are one, there's literally no difference between being a wizard and being a bard. The most powerful magical users in this world are virtuosos and prodigies. The most complicated spells also sound more complicated, like progressive rock or concertos for orchestra. Styles also sort of translate. Green magic sounds more or less like Irish folk music, while black magic sounds more like a Paganini's Caprices. Okay, so that was the big theme. Now for my first example, let me introduce you to the idea of a war orchestra. In this world, war used to be fought with marching bands, because of course they're more mobile, right? But eventually, a group found out that some instruments have more destructive power, and they changed war forever. But those instruments, they tend to be bulky, like big percussion, or harps, or pipe organs. So the whole military apparatus evolved in such a way to allow armies to carry those big instruments to the battlefield as some sort of artillery. Picture that, a trench battlefield with one pipe organ on each side. They start to play and the orchestra start to follow with big percussions and entire string sections, and fire starts flying through the sky. It's nice because it already comes with the soundtrack, right? Now let's go for a more nature-oriented example. Let's talk magical creatures. In this world, any creature that can produce a song is magical by default, and many have evolved over centuries to be particularly sorcerous and powerful. Two are notable on that front. They dominate many biomes and give humans a lot of trouble. Cicadas and blue whales. And those animals inspired a lot of human magic, becoming revered in many cultures, sometimes even religiously. Imagine a temple in which people get together to try to imitate the sounds of those creatures. Imagine that those temples have particular shapes to encourage reverberation. For my third and last example, I want to work with something more indirect, more nuanced. As the knowledge of music theory is so common in this world, the terms, the language of music theory tends to mix with normal day-by-day language. So if you meet somebody special, you might say, being with you is such a pentatonic. Or, unfortunately, when you're breaking up with them, you might say, we can't be together. You modulated too much. There's a triton between us. Just as that, visitors from other places might be a bit confused. Unless, of course, they're bards. That's it for today's exercise. Thank you so much for your attention. Here's a playlist with other Worldbuilding Tower videos if you're interested in this format and those skills. Thank you so much for my patron Malkyo for sponsoring those videos. You're so cool. If you want to donate $1 or $2, the link will be in the description below. It will mean the world. And that's it for 2020, folks. I see you in 2021. Ciao, ciao.